Would you pray with me? Gracious God, we give you thanks for the gospel, for it challenges us, it draws us, and sometimes it even cuts us. But we know that the gospel is for good, for your good. It needs to be shared and propagated, that your kingdom might spread here and around the world, that all might know and hear good news. Amen. This will not come as a surprise to most of you. However, that being said, I think I've finally found a political party I can support. It's not the Democrats. It's not the Republicans. Though I have a streak of libertarian in me, don't tread on me, it's not the libertarians. Socialists, nope. Communists, heavens no. My politic is the gospel. My politic is the gospel. And I'd invite you to make the gospel your politic too. To place Jesus Christ front and center in your life. The gospel is good news of Jesus Christ. With Jesus as the politic, as the top priority in our lives, all other concerns of this world fall into place, fall into the order that is God's will, right? Think about politics. Think about economics. Think about ethics, business, law, science, medicine, health, and wellness. Relationships fall into place. Family falls into place. Every aspect of life gets reprioritized when we make gospel our politic. All have their foundations rocked and sifted, and some of them are even tipped on their head, upside down, by the good news of Jesus Christ. All take their place in a supportive role for the one priority of life, and that is Jesus Christ. His ministry, his promise, his message. So to get at the root of the gospel politic for this day, let's talk about rules. Rules. Okay? Many individuals who decide to follow Jesus will be looking for a black and white list of rules to live by, kind of like an operator's manual. This is the rules by which Christianity lives. Okay? This is what you got to do to be a good Christian. And for many, they will see the Bible as that rule book, a set of rules that has to be followed. Think about the Ten Commandments. Think about the Beatitudes. Oh, how convenient it is to copy and paste into a word processor, make them bullet points, and you got a list of rules to live by. These are the laws to live by. These are the approved behaviors of a faithful Christian. Many people, their development of faith will stop there. It's as if following Jesus can be reduced to an ethical principle. But the problem begins to surface when following a simple list of rules. The problem begins to surface when we realize that following rules stunts our development of faith. It inhibits spiritual development. For you see, there are biblical inconsistencies that undermine fundamentalist belief. We find ourselves stuck in the quagmire of righteousness and judgment right? Those who live by the rules and those who don't live by the rules. And what does Jesus tell us today? Do not judge, do not condemn, right? That's where that road of rules leads to. Judgment and fear overtake faith. And that becomes the quicksand of a dead-end, failed faith. When we become followers of simply the rules, instead of followers of Jesus, rules becomes the new idolatry. We worship the rules instead of worshiping Jesus Christ. We lose a sense of Christ's mercy and his grace. We become sucked under and drowned by the noise of schism, inquisition, exorcism, and death. So, here's my invitation to you. Come with me and let us explore together a little deeper this gospel politic. Yes, keep playing the life by the rules. I encourage you. However, let's go a little deeper and be drawn closer to Christ. So let's talk about expectations. Expectations. Many Christians will experience Christ's Sermon on the Plain and say to ourselves one of two things. Some of us will go, oh boy, I'm in trouble. I'm not worthy. I don't love enough. And I've worked hard for what I've got, and I don't like sharing it, to be quite honest with you. Right? I'm not very merciful to others, and quite frankly, I'm pretty judgmental of people who are not like me. But then others of us might have a different response to the gospel politic, to Jesus' Sermon on the Plain. Some of us might say, oh boy, that's me. That's exactly me. You know? I try to love everybody. I try to be generous to a fault. I try to be merciful. I try to be non-judgmental, sitting on my hands. I try to forgive. So where do we fall? Jesus is calling together this diverse crowd. Remember last Sunday I explained it was a crowd of not only Jews, but also Gentiles from the region. So this is mixed race, mixed culture, mixed religious, diverse group of people. They had been drawn to Jesus and they strained to hear his words. They were drawn by his teaching and they pushed in close because they had the expectation that they would be healed by his touch. So the crowd presses in close and they ask themselves, am I living up to God's expectations? Jesus' gospel politic requires them to ask of themselves, am I living up to God's expectations? Which is a beautiful question for us to ask us. Do you and I, do we live up to God's expectations for our lives? How are we doing? Are we living up to what God hopes we will do, as outlined and taught by Jesus? It's nearly impossible to talk about enemies without this sense of militaristic, testosterone-laden bravado, right? When you talk about enemies, you talk about special force troops. You talk about firepower and things like that. Talking about those who hate and curse you, boy, it brings up painful memories for me. I don't know about you, but those who hate and curse you, it takes me back to my childhood, to a playground where I was hated and cursed. I was bullied and humiliated. Speaking about those who abuse you. Wow, those of us who are victims of abuse, rape, or sexual violence. That's going to be a different experience for those of us who have been victimized or those who haven't been victimized. For those of us who have not been victimized, we cannot even conceive of the violence and the damage that abuse wreaks. Abuse opens Pandora's box of pain and trauma. So where does that leave us? Let's talk about love. Jesus, in his gospel politic, invites us to talk about love. Love can't be an all or nothing proposition. If it was, every one of us would fall short. Love comes from God, not from us. It comes from the Lord above. God's expectation is that disciples of his Son Jesus Christ are called to spread the love throughout every area of their life. And the visual image that came to me this past week is that of concrete being poured into a form. Starts in the center and the mason spreads it to every crevice, every part of the form. The other image that came to me this past week is a baker decorating a cake, starting with frosting on the top and using the knife to spread the frosting to cover completely every area of that cake. We are called to spread God's love into every human relationship, starting with the easy pour, the easy spread, and eventually smoothing it out into the most painful and shameful and hurtful broken areas of life. For you see, loving the easy makes it a little bit easier to love those who are less than easy. And loving the less than easy makes it a little bit easier to love those who are hard to love. And loving the hard ones of this world, it makes it that much more possible to love an enemy. And to love an enemy of this world and those who hate and curse you, even those who have abused you, that is the goal. To spread that love into every area of life. So how are we doing on it? Are we living up to this expectation to love? So let's talk about mercy, shall we? Jesus, his gospel politic is about mercy. How merciful are we towards others in our world? Do we do good to those who are less fortunate than we are? Are we generous to a fault? Are we generous until it hurts? Do we work to bring relief to those who are imprisoned by barriers and circumstances beyond their control? Do we work to bring relief to them? To remove the barriers of life? Are we committed to a life of service rather than being served? Are we all in on this? Righting injustice in this world and ending oppression wherever we find it. Are we all in? Like love, mercy is an essential core characteristic of our loving God, placed on display for all the world to see in the life and actions of Jesus Christ. So the question begs to ask in gospel politic is, how are you and I doing when it comes to mercy? Are we expanding our capacity for mercy? Are we expanding our capacity for mercy? How can we do that? Well, the first place that we can expand our mercy to the world is by getting off the couch, getting away from the TV, getting out of this sanctuary to roll up our sleeves and get our hands dirty in the mission field. It means that we must serve. We must volunteer, make a meal, take a meal, and deliver a meal. Sort, sow, pack, send, muck out, rebuild, or build fresh. And do it all in the name of Jesus Christ our Lord. That, my friends, is gospel politic. That's the intersection of mercy and love. So what's at stake with this gospel politic? What's at stake? When we ask this question, what's at stake? This is an invitation to take gospel at yet a new level. There's even more here. And the older I get and the more that I immerse myself in good news, I discover new and fresh things in gospel all the time. So let's go together and seek and examine what's at stake here. What's at stake with gospel politics. For Jesus, the stakes were not simply if people believed and followed him or not. The stake was much higher. The stakes of gospel politic is what got Jesus murdered. Jesus was crucified because of the good news. Because the good news upset the norms of this world. For you see, the gospel politic is revolutionary. And it sets the world on fire. And how do you know just how revolutionary it is? It's where gospel politic begins to have signs of resistance, of pushback. When the world pushes back against the gospel politic, when resistance rears its ugly head, that is always a sign of God's presence, God's work, and God's will. Where did Jesus find resistance? In his hometown synagogue. Remember when he pulled out the Isaiah scroll and they threw him out of the synagogue and they were going to throw him over a cliff? Jesus faces resistance when he encounters the Jewish authorities and they condemn him for healing on the Sabbath. They condemn him for violating other Jewish laws. Where does Jesus get pushed back? The temple authorities. The temple authorities, when he goes in and upsets the treasury, he turns over a few tables and he ticks off the finance team. That's where Jesus gets pushed back. Where does Jesus get pushed back? When religious authorities use Rome as their thugs and they have him arrested. That's pushback. When they abuse Jesus, that's pushback. When they humiliate Jesus, that's pushback. When they kill Jesus, that's pushback. That's resistance. When they put him in the tomb and thought the story was over, that's pushback. But you and I, we know that that's not where the story ends. Because the tomb couldn't hold him. God always triumphs over resistance. Good news proclaims redemption and salvation. Good news paints a picture for what living in God's kingdom can look like. Our partnership with God and with one another is what's at stake moving forward. That's what's at stake, our partnership with God and our partnership with each other in our faithful effort to discern and follow God's will as we engage in the sacred task of kingdom building. Do unto others as you would want done unto you. That tells us that how we treat others matters. How we treat others matters. How we treat others dives to the central core of the Christian experience and of a maturing faith. God's kingdom is a land of peace where love and mercy find an intersection, where they abide, where judgment is replaced with acceptance and inclusion. And wherever that intersection is, expect resistance. Expect pushback in our effort for kingdom building, even as Jesus was resisted. So it comes down to rules and expectations and resistance. That's the way it is with Luke's sermon on the plain. He's inviting us to go deep into gospel politic, to mature our faith beyond merely living by rules. Jesus invites us to dive deep, to come into God's season in God's due time.